When you won the chairmanship in February of 25, you criticized the DNC's refusal to release their 2016 autopsy as exactly what not to do. You said, quote, "Was there any utility in doing that?" And then promised your 2024 autopsy would be different. Your exact quote was, "Of course it will be released." Why did you change your mind on that?
Well, look, I mean, what I said all along, even when I ran for this position, is that we were going to focus on the things that will help us win the upcoming election.
Well, finding out what you did wrong in the last election would help you win the next election, but the problem is what they found out and what they don't want you to know. We're gonna get to that in a second. But when he became the head of the DNC, Ken Martin was talking about, oh, we gotta do autopsies and we gotta figure out what's going on. So here's more of Ken Martin going back on his word.
Why not release the full report? What's in the report that you wouldn't want
well, first off,
to publicize?
There's no smoking gun in the report, and I know that's what everyone's so eager to learn. The smoking gun. Guess what, John?
But if there's no smoking gun, why wouldn't you just release it then?
Because we want to keep the focus on the lessons. Because what ends up happening here is that people, of course, want to weaponize the report in a way to look backwards, to point fingers, place blame in a way that actually doesn't keep us focused on the upcoming election. But instead, the navel gazing of focusing backwards actually takes us backwards. We're 189 days from this election, John. What we don't need to be focused on is actually relitigating 2024. What we need to do is learn the lessons of 24 and the years preceding that can help us win this upcoming election. Guess what, John? In the third closest presidential election in the last 100 years, everything mattered. There's nothing that didn't impact that election.
But why did you spend the money going to 50 states, doing all these interviews, doing all this stuff, and doing this report in the first place, if you weren't going to release the full results of it?
All right, great line of questioning by Jon Favreau on Pod Save America. Check that out. And Ken Martin's responses were hilarious. Now, look, you need to learn the lessons of this last election, but that's why we're keeping them super secret. And if you ask me what they are, I'll say that's navel gazing. You're just pointing fingers. You're trying to blame people. We don't want to do any of that. We don't want to learn any of the lessons, but we want. I just said we want to learn the lessons. That's what a person who's desperately lying looks like. So now I'm going to tell you the two things that they're trying to keep hidden in a second. But first, Ryan, your 2 cents.
Hearing that kind of sniveling Washington, D.C. nonsense, but from the like Fargo and Minnesota accent is just incredible. It's like, well, John, I'm sure you did actually get the true coat. And so if you don't have the true coat, your party's gonna get scratched in the next election. I could go back and look at our contract that we signed, and I'm sure that right there it says that you've got the true coat. I could talk to my manager if you want a discount on the true coat. That part of it is just so like, wow. Like, oh, like this is the chair of the DNC? Like we can't even get lied to by people that we can like at least respect throughout it. I think part of it is obviously what people have said, that Gaza played a much bigger role than the party wants to admit. Also, and if you listen to them very closely, they raised $1 billion and spent it in a period of weeks, basically. That money went somewhere. That money was spent by people and people who own LLCs. Those people don't really want people knowing, wait a minute, you spent $112 million on what? Like how did this help the party at all? And where's this money? So I think Gaza is in there, but I also think it's largely like insiders being like, let's not release what we did with $1 billion in like an 8-week period. Because people are not going to be happy with what we did with $1 billion in an 8-week period.
Yeah. So Ryan got to the third secret factor that I was going to get into, which we will in a second. And you're absolutely right about Ken Martin.
Your thunder here, Jenks. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no, not at all. You crazy? What am I going to keep a secret from one of the best investigative reporters in the country? Uncovered it right away. So Ken Martin used to be a progressive in Minnesota. That's why it's even more depressing. Like the minute you enter DC, your brain becomes zombified. It's happened to almost everyone who's gone there. So they're like, must help Democrats get more corporate donors. Consultants are great. Israel's the best thing on earth, okay, etc. So that's what happened to poor Ken Martin. I do actually kind of feel bad for him. So now let's go to the two other factors and we'll come back to the consultants. One factor is so bad they didn't even want to study it, right? So New York Times reported earlier last summer, Democratic National Committee's examination of what went wrong in the 2024 election is expected to mostly steer clear of the decisions made by the Biden turned Harris campaign and will focus more heavily instead on actions taken by allied groups, according to interviews with 6 people briefed on the report's progress. So in other words, like, don't, but we have to protect Joe Biden's feelings. We're still protecting Joe Biden's feelings? That gargantuan egomaniac who's like, I don't care if I have dementia. It has to be me and only me. I don't mind losing to Trump. Who cares? Destroy the country. But it has to be me. And we're protecting that son of a bitch's feelings. And Kamala Harris, well, she might run again. So her, corporate donors are like, you better not blame Kamala Harris. She was the candidate. We're not allowed to talk about what mistakes the candidate made. Yes, only allied groups, preferably progressives. Okay, wait, but progressives are on the opposite side, so okay, that doesn't help.
Look, one of the biggest problems with political media right now isn't just bias. It's how quickly the same story gets spun into 2 completely different realities depending on who's telling it. That's why I recommend Ground News. It's a website and app that pulls together reporting from across the political spectrum so you can compare how the same story is being covered, who's covering it, and what kind of narrative they're pushing. Take this story about Pete Hegseth refusing to rule out US troops on the ground in Iran. On Ground News, you can immediately see how differently outlets frame that same development. The Daily Signal downplays the danger by stressing that this isn't Iraq and that the war won't be endless. NBC, meanwhile, focuses on the key fact that Hegseth would not rule out American boots on the ground in Iran. Same story, 2 completely different realities. And Ground News makes that obvious right away. You can compare headlines side by side, see the bias distribution of the coverage, check the factuality ratings of the sources, and even see who owns the outlets behind the reporting. That matters because once you understand how stories are being framed, you start to see how public consent gets manufactured. Ground News also has a blind spot feed that highlights stories that one side of the political spectrum is barely covering. So you're not just trapped inside the version of the world your algorithm wants to feed you. If you're tired of being fed somebody else's narrative, I genuinely recommend Ground News. Go to ground.news/TYT or scan the QR code. Using our link gets you 40% off Ground News Vantage plan, and you can also gift a subscription directly through Ground News.
So who are the allied groups? Well, it turns out here, I'll skip the rest of that particular report. Okay, you know what? I'll give you graphic 5 here before I get you to the second reason. People briefed on the report's progress said they had been told it would focus more on outside groups and super PACs that spent hundreds of millions of dollars aiding the Biden and Harris campaigns through advertising, voter registration drives, and turnout efforts. The problem is that they did look into those groups, and what they found out was devastating. So they're like, no, it turns out those groups are super powerful too. Now we can't offend them or Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or anyone in Democratic Party leadership. So let's all go out there and BS and lie to everyone and say, no, we nailed it. We beat Donald Trump. Okay, here's factor number 2. Now reported by, surprisingly enough, Axios. Activists from the IMEU Policy Project told the DNC that the Biden-Harris administration's support for Israel was a factor in the party's losses because it drained support from some young people and progressives. Hamid Bandas, spokesperson for the IMEU Policy Project, said that during the meeting, quote, the DNC shared with us that their own data also found that policy was, in their words, a net negative in the 2024 election. 2 other senior aides at the pro-Palestinian organization also said that the DNC had drawn that conclusion. So Ryan, they find out, yeah, it was Biden and Kamala's fault. Yeah, it was all the super PAC's faults. Yes, it was all the consultants' fault. And yes, it was our fault for kissing Israel's ass because our donors told us to, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of not just our voters, but independents were against that policy position. When you put all that together, A, it looks like they wanted to lose, and B, they've purposely chosen to learn nothing. So if we trust them again, they're nearly guaranteed to lose again. That's my sense of it. What do you think?
Or at least they were willing to lose rather than do anything different than what they wanted to do or what they were trying to do. It's kind of amazing even to think about that. You have to hear from the Democratic Party that they acknowledge that funding and overseeing a genocide was a net negative. Like, can you imagine a world in which, on the base of voters, that voters are like, oh yeah, like I think that was good, and I'm glad that happened. Like that's like it's so far out of the realm of possibility. And then we as a Teo funded a poll in Michigan, but I think it qualifies for like the entire country, where we asked to say like to this sentence, do you agree or disagree with the sentence? And the sentence was something like, if a candidate won't stand up to AIPAC, do you think that they'll stand up? Do you think that they'll capitulate on other issues? In other words, like for you, is AIPAC more than just a question about the U.S. relationship with Israel? Does it stand in for you as on whether or not somebody will stand up for the country as a whole? And something like 2/3 of moderate voters said yes. Like if you're not willing to stand up to AIPAC, then how can I trust you to stand up for me on any other issue? Ta-Nehisi Coates had a good line where he said, Democrats, if they don't draw the line at genocide, why would I expect them to be able to defend democracy? And I think it's not just democracy, it's everything else. If you're not going to fight on that issue, that's so obviously the right thing to do, but you do the wrong thing because you're afraid or you're corrupt, then why would I expect you to do anything else? And so I think that had a much kind of deeper effect on the public than they want to acknowledge.
Totally. So look, I've been saying repeatedly here, Israel is not the cancer. Money in politics is the cancer. Israel is just tip of the iceberg. And the polling that you're referring to, Ryan, it shows exactly that they're saying, oh, now that I see the tip of the iceberg, I realize an iceberg exists. And so if Israel can buy the politicians, so can big oil, big pharma. Exactly, that's what we've been saying all along, right? So, yeah. And they in the Washington bubble though, they really do believe that I would say they think you have to support the genocide. Now they wouldn't phrase it that way, and a good guy that I talked to over the weekend when I was in DC. So not like a corporate suit and not an establishment Democrat, good guy. But even he asked me, well, in the presidential election, don't we have to support Israel? Because in Washington, they believe that's like a biblical command. Like if you don't, and they drilled into their head, not only do you have to, otherwise you're a disgusting Nazi or something, right? And everyone will shun you and you'll live in shame the rest of your life. But they think that all Americans think the same way. And they're like, what, don't we have to kiss Israel's ass? All Americans love Israel, don't they? It's like they seem incapable of reading a poll. So that's why I think the bubble in Washington, Ryan, is so different than the rest of the country. But the bubble is also so thick that you can't penetrate it. Like that they can't understand the simplest concepts. I mean, you're a reporter there, what's your take on it?
Yeah. It used to be in the very recent past a proxy in a different direction. In other words, if a candidate was willing to be critical, if a politician in Washington, let's say Dennis Kucinich or somebody, was willing to be critical of Israel in a serious way, what that was a proxy for, what that was a signal of to the kind of mainstream press in Washington, is that this is a person that's here to be a messenger. They're not here for power. Like we don't have to consider them to be a part of this conversation among serious people, very quote unquote VSPs, they would call them, very serious people. Like they literally had that acronym, if you remember in Mark Halpern's newsletter 20 years ago. So it was a signal. Oh, you're critical of Israel? Got it. Okay, that's cool. That's fine. It's cute. You're somebody out there that is kind of funny and interesting, but not in the conversation, not in the rooms. And so that idea, I think for whoever you were talking to, I bet they're like 50 plus, so they've just kind of been marinating in that idea their entire lives that like, if you want to be in the room where the decisions are made, if you want to be a serious person in the conversation, one of the tickets that you have to have has to say, I support Israel. And that is no longer the case because the media has broken apart. And it also goes back to what we were talking about at the top of the show with Graham Plattner breaking through despite everything. The media doesn't have the same hold anymore. But that is kind of still the way that they think about it, that it's a proxy for being a team player. And if you're not willing to be that, if you're not willing to say I support Israel, then you're not that team player.
Yeah, so look, I think, first of all, I did not know, for some reason, I didn't see it, but the phrase very serious people is the funniest thing I've ever heard. And it's perfect, it's perfect. And like, to me, the avatar for corporate media, mainstream media is Jake Tapper, right? And I think I'm looking forward to Jake Tapper's brain breaking, because what's gonna happen is he's been trained to kiss the ass of every politician, but he also trained to kiss the ass of Israel. So it's like, does not compute, must kiss senator's ass, must also kiss Israel's ass, does not compute, does not compute. So I'm super looking forward to that, especially when there's 4 or 5 of them. For if it's just one, like I'll tell you, Bernie, what an anti-Semite, we could dismiss him, right? But last thing, Ryan, on this is, look, before the election, Democratic leaders said Trump is a Nazi, and he's gonna end democracy. It's the most important thing in the world. That's why we're running a guy who has dementia, and his brain is leaking out of his ear, and he's polling in the 30s. So, because we love and serve power and wealth, right? So they never meant it. There were 2 parties in this country, this establishment left, establishment right, and they were identical other than fake fights over social issues, right? Is it possible that we regain both the Democratic and Republican parties and leave the establishment in the middle, that uniparty exists of like the Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Schumer and Gillibrand, and then they become one party? They're like, oh, you guys are right. Yeah, we totally agree on everything, and we're the corrupt party, and you got the Democrats on the left and the Republicans on the right. Is that within the realm of imagination, or do these parties have to just get destroyed and we create new ones?
Well, I think everything that's going on now is kind of positioning and people rethinking how they think about the world, but it's leading into it's whatever massive crisis is coming. So like we're kind of in like a pre-crisis era right now. That we're in like 2005, 6, 7. As people, and then everything was different, after the 2007, 2008 crisis. But the kind of both parties established were able to kind of stitch it back together. You got the Trump populism, you got Bernie populism that flowed out of it. But the next time, I think that the banks come to the government and they're like, oh, hey, these AI companies are defaulting on everything. The Gulf countries don't have any money anymore because they've been blown to pieces. We're insolvent. And we're looking at hundreds of thousands of job losses a month or more. That's going to be the moment where everything that we're thinking about now and the way that people are just talking with each other is going to, I think, be reshaped, because it's going to be close enough to the last bailout that people are going to be like, no, we're not bailing you billionaires out again. Like, we're done with you. Like, what? We're going to rescue this world. We're going to come together and rescue the world, but we're going to make a different world on the other side of it. So what exactly that looks like, I don't know, but it's going to be different.
I want you all to remember what Ryan just said, because I think he's 100% right. I think there's going to be an AI apocalypse economically. And then when that happens, people are not going to be interested in the establishment, Democrats and Republicans, telling them how they have to bail out billionaires, right? And then we're going to have a real political revolution on our hands. And that's when the freight train. The question
is going to be bailing them out of prison or not, bailing them out of jail or not.
Or
are we holding them without bail? Like, that's the.
At that point, there's either
bailout question.
Yeah, at that point, there's either going to be a political revolution or a physical revolution, depending on how things go. Because the American people are not going to tolerate bailing out billionaires, because all of our politicians are so obviously corrupt, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to be an amazing moment in American politics. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.